Okay, great. So I think we're ready to begin. We are also live streaming this, so Alex, you give me the okay? All right. I'm going to begin, before I do the introductions, with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the City College of New York, grounded on the bedrock outcrop of Harlem, is situated upon the ancestral homeland and territory of the Munsee, Lenape, Wapinja, and Waikwazek peoples. As members of an educational community, we are obligated to know the histories of dispossession that have allowed the City College of New York to grow and thrive on this vibrant terrain. As writers, designers, and thinkers, we endeavor to build in ways that lead towards justice, and we are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing consequences of settler colonialism and to restore the whole people to the full enjoyment of their rights and heritage. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us in person and online. I am Michelle Valadares, the director of the MFA program in creative writing, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the MFA program and Professor Michal Deckel, raise her hand up there, who is the director of the Rifkin Center for the Humanities and Arts, and the two programs are the co-sponsors of this event. We would like to thank our funders, Barbara Rifkin and the David Dortort Fund for Creative Writing. And I'd also like to thank everyone who's helped us, the staff in the English department, the fiction editors and students, and the college for helping us make this wonderful event happen. Today, we are honored to have with us a giant of American literature, Joyce Carol Oates, one of the most respected and honored writers of our time. She is the prolific author of novels, short stories, essays, letters, and literary criticism. She's the recipient of the National Medal of the Humanities Award, awarded by President Obama, the National Book Critics Circle Lifetime Achievement Award, the Penn Malamud Award for a Lifetime of Literary Achievement, the National Book Award, and the Jerusalem Prize, and those are just a few. She has published 63 novels, 47 short story collections, 16 collections of nonfiction, 9 collections of poetry, numerous plays, essays, and books for children and young adults. Currently, she is the Roger S. Berlin Distinguished Professor of the Humanities at Princeton University and has been a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters since 1978. Mark J. Mirsky is a professor of English at the City College of New York and the author of 13 books, among them 5 novels and a book of stories and novellas. He's also published 3 critical studies, The Absent Shakespeare, Dante, Eros, and Kabbalah. Blue Hill Avenue was listed by the Boston Globe as one of the essential books of New England. His last book, A Mother's Step, is a search for his mother in dreams and photographic albums. He is also the editor of numerous collections, including the Diaries of Robert Musil, the English translation. He has been the editor of fiction since its founding in 1972. He was the former director of Jewish Studies here at the college and our graduate creative writing program. He is our beloved colleague, friend, and he keeps us on our toes at the department meetings. Please welcome Joyce and Mark.
So what we thought was that we would have a conversation, because one of the delights in the last few years is going back and forth with Joyce in letters, and also reading more and more of her work. Published Joyce since 1975, it seems. But I really didn't get to meet her until one day when she gave the Phi Beta Kappa address at Harvard. And I met her in the corridor, and she said, "Oh, Mark, you're coming out of the closet as a Harvard man." So I guess I was. And then I met her a number of times at a mutual friend's house. And, well, I'll skip that. I'll skip to the time when I had met her, and I met her husband, Charlie, and we instantly bonded with one another and began to exchange anecdotes, and we plotted getting together, etc. Then COVID came, and I had to wait for the next party at Mariana Cook's, a wonderful photographer who's been on the covers of fiction, to meet Joyce again, and I hadn't heard that Charlie had passed away. So that was a very gloomy moment for me, but also I think it brought you and I into a kind of different connection. Mm-hmm. And we were sitting at the table afterwards and discussing a Donald Barthelme story, and I thought I did a better job than George Saunders did in understanding what was going on. And then Joyce, she one-upped me incredibly. She taught me the end of the story. Once someone has done that, I'm in their power. When you can teach me something, since as my students know, I'm a very brutal teacher. Oh, okay. When someone can teach me something, I simply surrender. And I totally surrendered to Joyce at that point. So without further ado, why don't we talk about Pumpkinhead?
Okay, that sounds fine.
I don't know how many of you saw it. It's very easy to see. It's been on the, it was a reading that was given of the story from Sourland, an early collection of your work. And the story Pumpkinhead appears in it with some other very powerful stories. Well, I think one of the most extraordinary things about you is that very early you were writing these absolutely riveting stories, and the hypnosis of what's at the center of Pumpkinhead is there in where are you going? Where did you come from? Mm-hmm. I think I'm misquoting the title again. I have so many of them in my head right now.
It's almost there.
Almost there. And that is the sense of control, of a woman going out of control. You speak about that after the reading of Pumpkinhead.
Right.
Do you remember? Can you remember that conversation you had after it?
Oh, vividly, verbatim. Well, that's a question? So.
Well, it's the prologue to a question.
Well, I want to say I'm really happy to be here, but I wasn't called beloved as he was. So, in fact, I have never been introduced as beloved anywhere, so I'm just kind of impressed. So, is that a question about Pumpkinhead?
Well, in Pumpkinhead, the woman so powerfully goes out of control when she thinks she is in control. And you talked about women in general finding themselves in a position where they think they are in control and suddenly goes wildly out of control. And it seems to me, and sometimes they want that in some part of them, and then sometimes they don't want it.
Well, I was trying to dramatize a situation in which a woman who's a widow is in her house and somebody comes, it's a sort of glimmer of headlights and somebody comes through the dark. I wanted to dramatize a very vivid, kind of eerie experience that we might have at dusk. There's a lot in the story about the light going down, and it's the crossing over time where we sort of maybe lose our daylight personalities. So this person comes and he's wearing a pumpkin head, I mean literally a carved pumpkin, and he's sort of coming to her a lot like out of the shadows. But it isn't so much that the woman is out of control, it's the man is out of control. He loses his the role he's been playing, you know. And I think that you have a background in drama, and there's a certain excitement and thrill when you have a theatrical scene where people are presenting themselves in a way, but then the masks fall off and something else emerges. So I was trying to dramatize that. And it did have a very personal connection with my life. Very often I'm writing about my own experiences, but they're kind of codified. They're sort of like hieroglyphics, or they're not exactly literal, but the emotions are my own experience, so I'm trying to give a form to them.
Well, you can find this on the is this mic picking it up now? I mean, I can project without a mic if you need it. All right. Project without a mic? Okay. So what struck me was two things. One, that although the performance was very good, and the actor was able to enter the character both of the woman and of the man, but the story was going so quickly as a play that I said, well, wait a second, things are going too fast. I'm not able to adjust to the language. And I think somewhere else I've read you saying that, the language is what absolutely ties you into the work that you're doing.
Yes.
So that when I hear that, where are you going, where have you been, now I have it, was turned into a movie with a happy ending. I'm shocked. I mean, what have they done to the story?
Well, if you're shocked by that, how are you doing these days?
No. Well, that's another topic I would say.
Yeah.
A lot of people have, I don't know, I don't read reviews, etc., but there has been some sense of the powerful violence in your stories. But after the violence that we experienced, both in the election and post-election, it seems to me that your stories are prophetic of a terrifying violence that lies at the center of the American imagination. And you are one of the ones who have seen it and insisted that it's there. And people are always asking, what's Joyce's secrets? And now I've been reading the book about you becoming a widow, the journal Joyce Carol Oates, letters to a biographer, and that stunning book. Now I have to look at my cheat sheets. I know the date was published 2015. 215. What am I talking about? 2000. Oh God. Yeah, 2015. What's it called again?
We could just play charades or something. Is it a novel?
I would have to have,
Is
I
it
knew
novel?
I would have to have my cheat sheet.
Book of American Martyrs?
No. That wonderful book that stops with Happy Chicken.
The Lost Landscape.
The Lost
The Lost
Landscape.
Landscape. I'm so glad I remembered the title of my own book.
Well, you do agree. You say somewhere that your work is a Sargasso Sea, yes?
That's true, but the big news is that my next novel is dedicated to Mark Mirsky. But he hasn't read it yet. So just when he thinks he's all done writing reading my work, then there's a new one coming.
No. There are 3 books sitting on my shelf or in my computer that I'm heading for, and I'm halfway through the book on becoming a widow. What astounded me, which I was not aware of, particularly because a number in the New Yorker, Daphne Wirkin, and again in the New Yorker, somebody who had access to your full journals, kept complaining, what's her secret? And your secrets are all over the place. I mean, anybody with a brain can see what your secrets are.
Well, I don't really understand when we are looking at the autobiographical background of work, because the work itself, like a piece of music, it just exists in itself. So I think when we look for autobiographical, background to fill in the blanks, that's not really helpful. It's kind of counterproductive, I think.
Well, what's interesting to me is the way your life, I mean, Greg Johnson in that wonderful book of yours, a book of his rather, and in the letters to a biographer, really does give us a very powerful portrait, an honest portrait of your life. And then I can see as a writer how your life is reflected in these stories. Your life is so different in many ways from the stories. One would never expect this kind of violence from the life you've led, and yet violence is absolutely implicit in many of the most powerful. So that when I think I wrote you this, when I put down babysitter, I mean, there's a short, you do that in a very short way in the collection Sourland, but then you return to a whole novel. And there it's so, I had to keep stopping, as I did when I first read Dostoevsky, because after a chapter, your head spins, and you have to sort of absorb it into your bloodstream before you can go and forward in this nightmare of, it's hard to say. You started with a certain reputation as a realistic writer, but it seems to me that you're driven again and again towards surrealism, to try to do justice to the power of what's happening. So that in the story Pumpkinhead, when you talk about crossing over, I go, wait a second, what crossing over? Is it death? Is it leaving widowhood? Is it trying to recover your sexual life, your life as a woman? What is she crossing over to? Crossing over has such a strong religious background to it. And at the end, that phrase is echoed, as if to say, this wasn't the crossing over I expected it. So suddenly I'm reading what to me is a religious story. And that's not quite what the reading left me with a sense of, because it was going so quickly. Just the sense of light, the landscape, the glistening, and the sudden shift from the death in March back to the moment somewhere in October before or after Halloween, when that story, Pumpkinhead, is taking place. So it seems to me, I had to rush out to get the copy to get the story so I could see what was happening in it.
Is that a question?
No, it isn't. Well.
You could repeat it.
What?
No, I'm just joking. No, I just wanted to say that when we're probably all writers in the room, and I think that there's like the crossing over is from your own particular self with lots of distractions and things in your life, crossing over to more of an impersonal being that's interested in structure and language and presenting work that actually doesn't have to have anything to do with your social self, you know. So when I want to write a story or a novel, I feel that I am crossing over to like another personality. It's not necessarily my own personality, and I try not to think about things that are extraneous. And I think that's very true for musicians and composers. You know, like you're literally with another language when you're creating music. So that's what I meant by putting emphasis on the biographical background. And I can say, I don't mean to sound mysterious or coy, but I actually don't understand how I've really written so much, because everything seems to take a long time. I just spend so much time and I'm revising and I'm getting in some sort of a sense like being enthralled by a scene, which I try to envision, but it doesn't come quickly. It's really not anything I can do like in one morning, or I could work for a whole week on a chapter. When I was writing Babysitter, I was imagining it as a movie that's unfolding in the historic present. So it's like an experiment. Have you do you write in the historic present?
Do I write about historic worlds?
No.
What do you mean by historic?
Well,
I'm not understanding.
the conventional, traditional way of writing is once upon a time there was, or in 1957. But when you're writing in a historical present, you're saying there is. We are here right now. and it's like whatever time it is, but we don't know what's going to happen at 8 o'clock, and we don't know what 10 p.m. will bring, and we have no idea what tomorrow is. So it's a different kind of consciousness from the writing that's more traditional. I wanted to experiment with writing in that first person, not always first person sometimes, but historical present, because I think we're all in movies. We don't have a script. We actually don't really know what's coming. We try to control. It's like driving a car where you have the wheel, but maybe it's not really connected with the tires or the wheels or something. And I think that's the experience of being a writer. You know, you think you're in control, but then there's some momentum, some very violent and powerful current that's kind of sweeps you along. And that's like the experience of being a writer. And then I can write for hours and hours, and when I'm very exhausted, then some new idea will come to me. So I might write like to 1 in the morning, a new idea that I wouldn't have known about at 4 p.m. So it's kind of that movie that keeps unfurling. But I don't know how I actually wrote all those books, and it makes me feel faint that I wrote 63 novels, because I'm having so much trouble writing a novel right now. Like at home, when I go home, there it is, waiting for me. But it doesn't seem to be helpful to be told that I've written like 1,000 books or something, because it somehow doesn't translate to the person we are now. In fact, it may make it more difficult, because you're trying to do something different.
But you're alive. The language is alive.
Well, we are in the present tense, and trying to embody. My greatest hope as a writer, it's sort of like a Shakespearean idea, that I can create experiences for the reader that are visceral and alive and real, almost as if they were really happening. That's the power of theater. When it's good theater, you're sort of just riveted and you don't know what's coming. And movies can be like that too. Prose seems a little different because you have like a book, you could sort of leaf through it. But I wanted to recreate that sense of us being almost helpless and not knowing where you're going. So Babysitter has like a subterranean subplot where maybe the woman is dead and she's lying in an autopsy table and her story's being told like she's having a dream.
Forget it.
I'm glad that's not my cell phone. But it was very dramatic when this movie came.
Somebody who understands this.
A secret admirer is calling him. So that's my long answer to your question.
Well, what made you take the story from Sourland and go on to write a whole novel?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah. I think sometimes I write a story in this great intensity, and it's not really fully realized. There's a lot more that's coming. Yeah. Now, Babysitter is based on Babysitter was a serial killer, a real person, and the murders and the crimes of Babysitter have never really been explained. It's thought that he probably died, he may have been incarcerated, or he may have committed suicide. It's not really known. So I'm drawn to write about American mysteries that have never been solved. So if you have any mysteries that have never been solved, I just find that so exciting, so tantalizing. I often write about those situations where there's a lot that seems to be in place, and you sort of think you know who might be the murderer, but yet maybe not. It's never really been proven. I find that so exciting as a writer. And often they have like a feminist perspective, like the woman is now going to tell the story. Until now, it's been the men telling the story. Like Black Water, my novel about Chappaquiddick, was the whole Chappaquiddick phenomenon about Ted Kennedy was always from the point of view of the man, the senator, and I wanted to tell the story from the point of view of the victim, who's a woman. And she literally in life didn't have any voice at all. So that is very exciting to do.
In Beautiful Days, Blue Fleuve, there are so many surreal stories in that collection, directly surreal.
Yes.
People stepping into canvases, getting lost, imagining a fractal museum which may or may not exist, the short piece about Bartholomew parodying his style.
Yeah,
right.
I forgot about
But
that.
Blur just totally captivated me. And it seems like a realistic story. And yet there seems to be some subterranean stream running under it that I can't quite understand.
Well, I'm so interested that you brought this up because my short story collections are usually arranged so the first story is quite realistic, and then there's a slow evolution to like crossing over into another realm where dream elements start to appear as they do in our own lives. I mean, sometimes we'd be daydreaming and have a thought, just comes out of nowhere. Then there are those strange, discombobulated, disjointed thoughts we have when we're falling asleep. Like you're sort of still awake, but some strange image comes unbidden out of the unconscious, but you are still awake, you know, and I'm interested in replicating those states. So as the book goes on, they get more and more surreal. I forgot about the Bartholomew story, and Mark knew Bartholomew very well. I did not know him very well, but I felt I understood him just from reading his work. Some desperation and bravado and yearning, a great yearning in him.
At first he was very mean to you and talked about wooden, described your prose as wooden, but then he fell in love with you.
Well, I think that Donald was very defensive. And when he first met me, he seemed to be offended that he thought that my writing sold well. But then he thought that I was like a bestseller. I don't know where he got that idea from. So as soon as he realized that I wasn't a bestseller, he kind of liked me. But he also had sort of a chip on his shoulder, to use a kind of a cliche. And I remember walking with his wife. What was her name?
I don't think you knew Kirsten, so it had to be
the next
Mariana.
Mariana. So I would walk with
Marion, actually.
Marion. I would walk with Marion, the wife, and he would walk with my husband Ray Smith because that's what men did. And it was like a macho rejection of me, but it didn't really mean that he wasn't a nice person. It was more like he's trapped in this sort of sexism of the 1950s or something. But I write about sexist men often, but I think with understanding and compassion because they're just so funny. You're like, ha, they think they're so, but we know that they're thin-skinned and insecure, so it's sort of like wanting to present the portrait in a full way, and then sort of reserving any judgment. Because I don't judge my characters usually at all.
You inhabit your characters.
Well, each person has his own integrity. Was it Spinoza said, all beings yearn to persist in their being, you know? We all yearn to persist in our being, and the fact that somebody's called evil by somebody else doesn't really mean that person thinks he's evil. And I think that's what the perspective of our lives is all about. And that some way of meeting and having a communion or a commonweal is what art can do, and particularly music can draw people together.
But that wickedly funny joke he played on himself, I think you were at his house when you were debating about...
Yeah. You remember all these things. He's got a fantastic memory. I have a funny memory too. It's like a vacuum cleaner that just pulls up a lot of stuff without any sense to it. Do they know who Bartholomew is? Because maybe people
Most
don't
of my
read
former
him.
students know. who
Yeah,
Bartholomew is.
you have to know who he is.
We haven't reached him in the course I'm teaching now, but the others do.
Well, he's a wonderful surrealist writer, and he owed a lot to the surrealists, the European artists, I think, Dadaism. He was very playful, but I think he was insecure.
Totally insecure. That's
Yeah.
why he had to drink.
Yeah.
But the joke he played was when you were discussing at his house. By the way, to be invited to his house meant that you were somebody he cherished. It
Oh,
was
well.
not, he refused to see Borges when they wanted to bring him over, etc. He wasn't particularly interested in that.
Oh, wow,
So
that's
It
amazing.
meant that you were high in his affections.
I would have invited Borges and have a photo op.
But he sat there in the illusion, not such an illusion, that you were a best-selling writer. And you had been on the bestseller list at one point. So that was enough to get him to imagine you and to imagine himself, because his sales at Farrar Straus was so pathetic that finally Roger refused to pay him the upfront advance, right? And Donald had to go to Faith Saylor's downstairs neighbor, who was happily at Putnam's and took care of him. Then he deserted her for basic books, and then I think he ended at the end. Lynn Nesbitt got him to Knopf, but he was humiliated. And
It's pretty good at
so
symposium.
when you said, when he said to you, "I'm not a best-selling novelist," and you politely laughed and he said to you, "Let's call Roger and ask him," and in his living room,
Yeah.
right? So he dialed Roger and asked, "Am I a best-selling novelist?" And gruffly, Roger Strauss said no.
We had the receiver to me. It's such a kind of male thing. Like, he's so angry and he's kind of humiliating himself. So he calls his own editor and says, "Tell her if I'm a bestseller." Then he handed me the receiver. Like, I didn't want to hear this. It's sort of some strange drama. And I said very little. He did most of the talking, which is so unusual.
But that's the strange thing about him, that he really enjoyed being knocked down. I observed that with him. When
We were
there.
walking once, and he said, "Oh, Nabokov died today. You feel better? Like we've all moved up." We've all moved up a notch, he said. And again, that is such a bizarre thing to say. Who would ever have thought anything like that? I mean, I was sort of stunned at the egotism of someone like that. And I remember John Gardner once said, "Joyce, come on, you know we're better than Dostoevsky." I thought, what? We're from upstate New York, sort of thing, like Western New York. And I mean, so the egotism of some of these male writers is just like throbbing. It would shatter crystal at 50 feet. And I'm sort of just sitting there, kind of nodding a little bit, because that's what you do. You say, okay, fine, But when I'm a writer, I'm not doing with these things. I mean, when I'm a writer, it's about language and creating a world in itself. And my personal or social personality, which is who you're meeting tonight, is really not the writer. I mean, we all have a persona. That's the word for mask, But when we're all alone with our work, we're kind of different people, so you never get to meet that person.
So now I was asked to make sure that you read one of your stories or poems.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you to do that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, is this working? No.
Oh, there it goes.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So when I was anticipating today, I was so excited because I thought I would read poems of particular relevance to Mark, and they're all new poems. And I'm really sort of excited and anxious because they're very new. And the first one I have never read, and the second one is sort of a strange, bizarre poem. So I thought you might want something a little lighter. Not that this is too light, but it's been such a catastrophic time, I think, since last Tuesday. We're all kind of in Through the Looking Glass or Alice in Wonderland and crazy land or something. So I thought I would just read some poems rather than try to write a longer story. So the first poem that I'm going to read, I feel like a schoolgirl now. The first poem I'm going to read I just wrote recently, and you can't really see it, but you can see that it's not too long. So don't panic, it's not like 30,000 lines, but it's 4 stanzas of 4 lines each. And then there are rhymes, and it breaks so that the rhyme kind of echoes. And then there's just a little italicized 3 words at the end, which is kind of sad. It's sort of a sad poem, but it's like a confessional poem. I think Mark will understand it. It's got a lot of assonance with consonants and vowels. Okay. The long, heavy chain. In East Attica, New York, on a long, heavy chain, tethered to a frayed nylon collar, cutting into the soft down at his neck, a basset hound with the long, mournful face of H.P. Lovecraft has worn a grassless path around his dog house inside concentric circles of hell, to which the long, heavy chain has tethered him, though, like the hero we all dream of becoming, he has managed to climb up onto the roof of the doghouse where his mournful eyes beg us, come closer, a hand on the bony forehead, just a touch. So I think we've all seen dogs that have been just sort of marooned in their own backyards, and they have chains around their necks, and their whole world is like this circle around their doghouse, and that's just about one of these dogs, an animal that has no voice, so sometimes people try to give voices to those who have no voice. And then I also thought it was like a symbol of many of us, that we're tethered and going around and around the doghouse, and all we really want is just a gentle hand on our bony forehead, just a touch. So I have another sort of a longer poem. I can't believe I'm reading some of these poems. So this poem is just a little bit longer. I have to apologize. It has like the trajectory of a line of bees, like venomous bees that are rushing at a person. Is there anyone in the room who has ever been attacked by a swarm of bees or hornets? Just a couple people.
No,
You were too?
recently, twice,
Twice?
over a compost barrel.
Well, twice is a bit much. Most of us after the first time, we don't have a second time. I'm surprised that there aren't more people here. Well, what happens is that the idea of the bee line, you realize that's not just a metaphor. It's actually like they're coming at you. And the wasps, or there could be wasps, or yellow jackets are particularly virulent, but bees, all kinds of stinging creatures like that. So they not only come out and bite and sting you, but when you run, they follow you. You run in a house, and they follow you, and then you discover like they're in your hair, and you're in your clothes. And I have written this poem called Venom, a love poem. And each of the little stanzas is just some little shriek of desperation as the person is trying to get away. And the poem is also about kind of a hallucinatory experience where you start rhyming in odd ways, because maybe your throat's going to close up and you're going to die like in 2 minutes, which can always happen and you don't really know. Venom, a love poem. stepped into a nest of bees, swarming up from the underbrush of arid August in a fiery lava, enveloping her ankles, legs, knees as she staggers back astonished by multiple stings too rapid to grasp, in disbelief stammering, "No!" Beginning to pant in sheer terror that she will be dead within minutes as airways shut in her throat, heart racing and plunging, heedless. To realize so profound a mistake is to realize it's already too late for remorse, regret, only frantic flight, as warrior bees, pitiless as kamikazes, with but a single venom sting in their artillery, nonetheless pursue the enemy, clinging to ankles, legs, knees, fierce stinging hate, wild to ejaculate hot acid venom. Fleeing for her life is what we do, who might imagine a more stoic strategy, like that of Marcus Aurelius, for instance, until, desperate not to die, we flee upstairs blindly, hoping to outrun warrior bees with their single stings for which, unlike you and I, they are willing to die. Trembling fingers discover inside shoes and socks mashed bees still twitching with life, and scattered on the floor of the house dying bees of singular beauty, so many, so far from the hive grim in pursuit. She must envy, for nothing in her solitary life is worth to her the sacrifice of that life, like the bees' sacrifice for the hive life that will outlive them and forget them. Overnight, feet, ankles, legs, knees swell to twice their normal size, thrumming with pain, somewhere beyond the register of pain. Despite home remedies, ice, baking soda paste, antihistamine and steroid pack, Tylenol, Percodan, skin tight to bursting, tumescent with bee venom, scalding to the touch. Balls of her feet so swollen she rolls on her weight giddy, as on miniature barrels, careening drunken and balance askew, as if her very vertebrae were in mutiny and collusion with the winged enemy, born broken now in her body, infinitesimal as DNA. Well, should I read any more, or should I?
Yeah, more.
Do you want to hear a funny poem? God, I just feel like I was so sorry to have to read, kind of my typical anxious things. And I have a poem, it's like the only poem I've written ever that's funny. But now I can't find it. It was in here before. Okay. Some of you who are English professors have heard of Christopher Smart, who was a madman, but a very brilliant poet. And this poem the poem I'm going to read is called Jubilate, an homage in cateral verse. Now, cateral is a word that I made up. It's like doggerel, but it's cats. And cateral is superior to doggerel for reasons we'll go into. So Christopher Smart lived from 1722 to 1771. Much of the time he was in a madhouse. And he wrote these really ecstatic poems. I would compare him to William Blake, in the kinds of ecstasy and visions that they had. He wrote a very famous poem for I Will Consider My Cat Geoffrey, which is actually only published in 1939. I didn't know that had been lost for a long time. It was said to be written in St. Luke's Asylum. So my poem is actually sort of a long poem, so this is the last thing I will read before the end of everything. It's gotten really long. This is sort of frightening. Maybe I'll just skip parts and you won't notice. That's one good thing about poems. People just skip all around and the audience is just kind of glazed and waiting for it to get over it. Jubilate, an homage in cateral verse. For I will consider my cat Cherie, for she is the very apotheosis of cat beauty, which is to say nothing extraordinary, for in the cat beauty is ordinary, like the bliss conferred upon us in the hypnosis of purring. She has been known to knead her claws upon a sleeve, and on a knee, and on bare skin, sharp claws sinking in, just a warning. For she is of the tribe of tiger and eyes burning bright, though cuddling in the night until you wake to discover, where is she? Cherie? Don't inquire. For in considering my cat Cherie, I am considering catitude, each cat the essential equivalent of all others, not varying freakishly in size like crude D*GS, but pleasingly platonic. Cat chutzpah, which has like PAW at the end. That's for you. That's for Mark. Chutzpah is the sheathed claw, no heart born upon a foreleg, but your challenge to decode. Like poetry of a subtlety that does not bark its meaning, but forces us to be just a little smarter than we are, unlike dogs whose uncritical adulation makes us dumber. Of Twitter, it is estimated somewhere beyond 31% who tweet are feline, in nocturnal prowl, slyly retweeting their kind, reproducing, replicating the dark, rapacious, ever-fecund feral soul that is a sea upon which civilization floats uneasily. For such eloquent kitty Twitter, only the most elegant kitty litter. But if you ask Cherie, what is this? The reply is blank, blinking innocence. Mew, what's with you? I hope there are some cat people in the audience. Good, it's us against them. Live free or die is the cat's very soul that makes of us, by contrast, fawning and subsqueakious beings, not unlike dogs. Such beauty instructs us in its own perfection, for it is beyond mere use. No work cats, watch cats, plebeian beings, but each descendant of gods in ancient Egypt honored, and how like a deity to sink teeth into a rat, a creature that, squeamish mankind abhors, while maintaining purest cat innocence. Sandpaper tongue, utter longing, cat love, the nudge of furry hard head. But oh, where has she gone? Kitty, kitty, kitty? She may come when called, like the dog, but mostly she will not, for, unlike the dog, she has got an interior life. Inscrutable, inaccessible, unpossessable. She does not aim to please or aim at all. Her blessing is a fluke, as readily withdrawn as given. Never will she do your bidding. Never will she falsely flatter, nor deceive you that you much matter, beyond the reach of the hand that pets and feeds. Also, she has got much busyness out of doors by moonlight. Don't inquire. But there she has gone headfirst through the plexiglass cat door to return with, dropped on the floor at my feet, a small carcass very still. Oh, Cherie, what have you done? Only the cat's gift is freely given. The dog in subservience as in chains has no free will, and so, oh, Cherie, is this for me? For I would consider my cat Cherie, whose tail twitches irritably across these keys when confronted with prose found wanting. For it is irrefutable the cat is the harshest critic of prose, cathedly rejecting what has been doggedly written. This will not do at all. This is not it at all. Where the dog drools delight with very mediocrity in complicity. Sometimes the furry cat sprawl obliterates the typescript utterly, for you dare not move a limb, a tail, even gingerly from the laptop, at risk of provoking a hiss. Mew! Whom are you touching? You. I have to say, parenthetically, that one of the reasons I have written a good deal, and some novels are very long, is that my cat's on my lap and she will not let me get up. And so I might just write, 20 pages, but I end up writing like 50 pages because the cat just, you start to get up and they put their claws in. Yeah. So that's the explanation. If I dare rise from this desk prematurely, if I dare plead exhaustion vehemently, Cherie will dig in her claws, securing my knees with a cry, "Mew! Where do you think you're going, you?" Thus, hours, days, and ages accumulate in pages, and pages into books, and books into oeuvres. Prolific. The literary judgment. I can't believe I read this poem. But the last stanza is the very best, because now I'm calling upon all the other writers who loved cats. There are a lot of us. The very best books, it is said, are not ghost but cat-written. Simenon, Colette, John le Carré, not least Hemingway, Auden, Eliot, Philip K. Dick, Borges and Burroughs and Patricia Highsmith, Jean Cocteau and Henry David Thoreau. Do you like that rhyme? I thought bees and kamikazes would get some applause, but because nobody's ever done that before. Bees and kamikazes. That was the other poem. So here, Jean Cocteau and Henry David Thoreau, H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe. Quote, "I wish I could write as mysterious as a cat," Poe said. Twain, Bradbury, Raymond Chandler, Sartre, Sylvia Plath, and Daniel Handler, not least Samuel Johnson, quote, "But Hodge shan't be shot. No, no, Hodge shall not be shot." That's Samuel Johnson talking about his cat. Rapidly retreating into the mist of time where muse is suffused with mouse until the two are emerged in mystery, cat and collaborator. Thank you.
So, shall we open it up to questions now? Oh, you don't want to read a piece of prose, do you?
Oh, I think, no, I'd love to hear from the audience.
Okay, so questions. Somebody got a roving mic or, okay.
Hi. Mine is like a two-part question. So we were talking about your story, The Doll, in my class, and there was a lot of debate about, like, I don't know, was she a doll? Was it a dream? And all these different things. And so I was curious about, like, your origin of creating the story, but also, like, I feel like in general, you do this like intentional kind of ambiguity, like I'm not going to tell you what it is, but in a way that it doesn't seem vague, So I guess I was just wondering if you could talk about that too as like a choice and how you do that.
This is a story called The Doll, not The Doll Master.
Yeah, The Doll.
Oh, okay. Well, I wish I had known that you were going to be, making reference to that, because I could have reread it. Because I mean, would immediately recognize it if I saw it, but The Doll, is that from some collection of some time ago, maybe?
Yeah, the Haunted.
Oh, Haunted, yeah. Well, I often am trying to evoke a mood so that the reader, like reading poetry, where you kind of infer what's going on. But I do have more recent story called The Doll Master, which is a person who's, you sort of think he's collecting dolls, but they're really actually girls, like children. But so that story has kind of supplanted the original doll. Did you have another part to your question?
Is there another question?
Oh, yeah, how you're able to do that.
Well, I think life is very ambiguous, and I really never know what to think. If I'm asked my opinion about something, I can give some sort of plausible answer, but the more you think about something, the more complex it is. It's like the story Fractal that you made reference to, which is like one of my favorites. Stories that I've ever written, but I don't know why I wrote it. And I always think there's some secret in that story about why I wrote it, but I'm not sure what it is. But a fractal, like you're looking at an edge of something, you know, like a map of a seashore. Then the closer you get to the actual thing, the more uneven it is. Like something that looks like a straight line, when you really, like through a microscope or a magnifying glass, you would see how lumpy it is, you know? So I sort of think our lives are like that too. Like, was your childhood happy or unhappy? It's impossible to answer because it probably was a very complex mixture of the two. And sometimes in our lives, we look back on a period of our time and we realize we were very happy. But we didn't know it at the time because things really got worse afterward. Isn't that true? You think, oh my goodness, people go around complaining and that actually was the best time of their lives. And then the rest of their lives, they have to kind of be falsely cheerful. So ambiguity to me is much more a genuine response to life than clear-cut opinions. Yes?
So you're very active on social media, which is a place where many writers' productivity goes to die. And I'm just wondering what role posting, connecting with people online plays for you as a writer. Maybe it's just something you do for yourself to remind yourself that you're human. But what does it do for you?
Well, in a way, I'm sorry I ever started Twitter. I didn't ever really join it. I was put on it by my publisher, because in the beginning, which is a long time ago, Twitter was a place where people posted, like, I'm going to give a reading, you know, at City College, like, and you say when and where. That's sort of like posting. And then it became a place where people were recommending books and movies. And in the beginning, there were lots of jokes and playfulness on Twitter, but there weren't that many people on it, I think. Then as years went by, more people joined, and then at the 2016 election, everything got politicized. And since then, our lives have been so politicized. Some people are so young they maybe barely remember before this time, but life wasn't always so politicized. Like now, it's become sort of like a hazardous and just kind of terrifying. But there was a time on Twitter when things were lots of jokes, and Steve Martin was the leading person on Twitter, and he was so funny, and he's never political. He's just kind of very goofy and surreal kind of humor. So then as time went on, it changed, and now it's very politicized, and almost everything is in response, what I do is in response to somebody else's tweet. So it's like a conversation. But I still do recommend books and movies. I think that I want to keep doing that. But if the whole thing just disintegrates and collapses, it's probably just as well.
What's happening right now?
You know, that's what they said before when Musk brought it, but it didn't. So, I don't know. Whatever happens, you know, is good. I'm sure there's a Yiddish expression for that. Some gesture, sort of like, you know.
Hi, my name is Gia. I've read Blackwater like 100 times. I think I have it like memorized. And I'm a poet, and after I read Blackwater, I started writing short stories. I wanted to know what influence poetry played, if any, in writing Blackwater, because it seemed to be very potent and prosaic. And I find myself, even on the reread, I get lost in it.
Oh, thank you. That's such a good question. So interesting question. Well, you probably noticed that it has the structure of a ballad. I used the musical ballad structure for that novella, where in a ballad we have the phenomenon of incremental repetition. Ballads tell stories, but there's a lot of repetition. And the repetition of lines, and then some new information in every stanza. So a ballad like Barbara Allen, it starts off and it tells a story, but there's a lot of repetition. So that was the structure that I used, very definitely. I would love to do that again. I've used musical structures sometimes in my writing. I have a play called Tone Clusters. Do you know what tone clusters are? Well, Henry Cowell was a very experimental composer of the early 1900s. I see your piano there. Well, the tone clusters are played inside the piano on the strings. And there's no resonance or memory. There's no echo. Much of what you do with a musical instrument, there's sort of like resonance. With a piano, you're playing with the pedals. So I use that form, and I've done a few others that are musical forms. But thank you for that question.
Thank you for the answer.
Because the last line of every chapter is, and the black water filled her lungs, and she died. And as we know, people who are drowning, they seem to die many times. They come back to life, and they die, and it's not a simple, steady death. It's sort of a horrible death. Same with strangulation. It's like not continuous. And so that using the final line, that's the ballad form, was very thematically relevant.
Hi, I would be curious to hear how your experience of the job of being a writer has changed over the course of your career, just thinking about Twitter and how the way that we promote and publicize books has changed. I'm really curious about from your perspective.
Well, I don't think writing being a job, so I don't know how to answer that. I really don't. I don't think things have changed that much for me. I think generally publishing has changed a good deal. Mark, do you think?
I'm looking at a question from one of my students.
No, but it's the idea of publishing over the years, because I think.
No, totally different.
Well, I think the main difference today is that it used to be that a young writer might be picked up by a publisher, not necessarily a commercial publisher, but somebody. And so like your first book sold like 200 copies, but then if they had faith in you, so they'd bring out a second book. Because my first book sold 500 copies like after 20 years. It was not what you call a runaway bestseller. But my publisher had faith in me. Same too with Faulkner. His early novels didn't sell at all, and finally, after some time, they started selling very well. But I think today, it's not like that. I think that the publishers are looking for a big bestseller, like a first-time novelist that will go viral. But then if not much happens, I don't think they will maybe publish them again. What's your impression?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It used to be a gentleman or a gentlewoman's profession. And whoever was financing it, often it was financed out of like the Strauss's pockets,
Yes.
or his wife's pockets,
Yeah.
or
Family.
New Directions was out of a steel fortune that James Laughlin inherited, and they basically invested in you, and they
Yeah.
expected a long relationship with you. That just completely disappeared.
Yeah.
If you came to New York and you started a literary magazine and you published other writers, then some firm would take pity on you and go on publishing you, because you served, there was a sense of a literary establishment.
Like a
which you
family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that just
Yeah.
went away.
It's gone because of the very big corporations that own publishers now. They may be someone, way off in Germany or London or someplace. They have no interest really in any individuals. And then what happens, I tell my students, as I also teach at NYU, a graduate writing program, that's almost easier for a first-time novelist to get published today than it is for an established person, because the first thing they do is they look at the computer of your sales. But if you have no sales, like you're a first-time person, they're kind of excited about marketing somebody. And they're sort of looking for certain kinds of stories, like it becomes like a marketing phenomenon. And that wasn't the case in the past at all.
So some of the, the sense of honor, the sense of gratitude just has totally passed out of it. I remember when my first novel was taken to Macmillan, and I walked up it was they had an incredible building on Fifth Avenue, and all these famous names like Yates, as I walked up this winding marble staircase, and I thought, I'm blessed, I'm in the Pantheon.
I know, that's so true.
And then I was pushed out very quickly.
Oh, well, that's not the ending we wanted to hear. But you were published somewhere else. I mean, you just were published somewhere else.
Okay, I see another question.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Really an honor. I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about your revision process, and if you have any kind of advice or...
Revision?
Yeah.
Well, 97% of what I do is revision. And I really love to revise. I am so thrilled to wake up in the morning, and I think that in the next few hours I'm going to be revising what I did yesterday, and it will make it better. So there's always something very positive. What is a little more uncertain for me is writing the next scene. So I take the chapters very seriously. They're sort of like dramatic events. It's like I'm seeing this event take place and I'm sort of in it. And I don't necessarily know how it's going to go, so I'm kind of anxious about that. Say, the analog would be that tomorrow afternoon you have to give a presentation somewhere, but you haven't written it yet. And there'll be other people there kind of interrelating with you, and you don't know how it's going to go, and so right now you're sort of excited or nervous. But when I do the revisions, it's not like that. The revisions are just very calm and kind of quiet, and sometimes if I write a couple paragraphs or 3 paragraphs and see which one I like better, then I get rid of the other ones, I consider that like weaving or like a cobweb or something. Spider webs are actually very exquisite, and they do them at odd ways, and there's just something very beautiful about the quietness of revision. I hope everyone feels that way. My students are fantastic. I tell them we have, critiques and discussion, and then some of them go away, then they come back a couple weeks later, and it's just so much better. It's tighter, there's some new ideas in it. It's so thrilling to see a young writer really plunge into the phenomenon of revision.
Okay, I have a student here, the one student who wrote me a question for today. Natalie, you want to come up here and just read your question, or read it from where you're sitting? Yeah. Whoops.
Thank you so much for being here. This is wonderful. Do you want me to read the whole?
No, just read your question.
Okay.
Joyce might not be too happy at my answer, but it's your question that's important.
So I was interested, relating to something that we've been discussing, beautiful days in the class, and last class you discussed the theme of people being fascinated with losing control. Oh, sorry. The fascination with losing control, which is kind of woven throughout many of the stories. And then I was thinking about the mention of the passive female, which we get in Fleuve Bleu. The quote is, had to let the man know that she wasn't a passive female. She didn't just lie there. And then I was thinking about the theme of passivity. So the question I had was, what role do you think passivity and choice play within these stories? And how do you see this theme being traced through the collection as a whole, as well as within other works of yours?
Well, it's a difficult question for me to really comprehend, because the stories are written separately, and so I don't really write about themes. Themes are something that people discuss, I think, in English classes, and that's understandable. But, you know, if you ask Tolstoy what his theme was in War and Peace, he'd say, well, war not good. Marriage better. I mean, or what's the theme of Moby Dick? You know, don't chase after a whale or a big fish or something. Like, I think when you're the writer, you're not really aware of the themes. It's more like something that people kind of extrapolate from it. So I wasn't particularly thinking of passivity, but sometimes passive-aggressive people are very powerful. I'm sure there are a lot of passive-aggressive people right in this room. And lots of men are passive-aggressive. Have you noticed? It's sort of a special thing that they have. Now, the passivity of the person who's really stubborn and strong is actually projected as a kind of quietness, but it's really very strong, and it's a very aggressive kind of passivity. And the female passivity in a lot of my writing is like that. It's really sort of aggressive and stubborn, seeing themselves as victims, but they're making other people make them be victims. I wish I had known that you were reading Beautiful Days, or maybe you did tell me, Mark, and I didn't, maybe some time ago, because I would have looked through it again. And I don't remember the last story in the book now. I'm much closer to Zero Sum, which is my more recent, and that I can sort of see the whole spectrum of the stories, but Beautiful Days, I actually don't remember the last story.
But Zero Sum, they will have read the story that was in fiction.
Oh, yes.
Because I both in my undergraduate class several semesters ago and this class read it. And it's a very important story for me because there's an earlier story of yours that I taught in tandem with it, and that is Letter Lover. And this, which is the same sense of a stranger aggressing somebody somewhat, whereas it's much more skillful. It's brilliant in Letter Lover, but it's really scary in the collection Zero Sum.
Is that Lovesick?
Lovesick, right. So you want to ask a question about Lovesick?
Mark,
Yeah.
we should probably kind of close up so Joyce can sign books.
Okay.
But Michal has an announcement.
First of all, thank you both. This was such a treat. So thank you so much, Joyce and Mark. Just a completely different subject, and sorry to change the mood drastically, but our next event at the Rifkin Center is going to be with a really interesting anthropologist from University of Chicago, Ryan Cecil Jobson, and he's going to be talking, very relevant for today, about the petrostate, basically fossil fuels and political power. So it's going to be at the Rifkin Center, not here, and I hope that many of you come. And thank you again. This was amazing.
Thank you so much. Maybe we can. I just want to add that there are books for sale, and the bookseller has a 20% discount on Butcher, her latest book, with your student ID, and Joyce will sign books. So if we're in the next 15 minutes, we'll be signing, and so please go purchase a book. Thank you so much.